NIMBYism is mostly a knee-jerk aversion to development, I would say. It's a mindset that if you don't like change in the area around you, you have a right to shut it down. They are the sort of people who will start signature campaigns, whereas the pro-housing majority doesn't do that. Hello and welcome back to Niemietz Answers. Today we're going to talk about the cause of most of Britain's problems, and that is NIMBYism. The first question that comes up on this is NIMBYism bad? Yes, that's definitely a yes, undoubtedly so. And I will tell you why. NIMBYism is organized resistance to development. It mostly refers to resistance to housing development and sometimes to the development of business premises such as retail outlets, offices and so on. And it can also refer to resistance against infrastructure projects, against energy generation, or even against water reservoirs. So what would you expect to happen in a country where NIMBYism, where organized resistance to development, is very strong? Well, you would expect very high house prices and rents. You would expect high costs for businesses of all kinds, and as a result, higher consumer prices. You would expect congested infrastructure, and you would expect higher prices for energy and water. Does this sound familiar? Of course it does, because that is literally Britain. Now, I don't believe that Britain has more NIMBYs than any other countries. It's just that we have a decision-making process for development which gives NIMBYs a lot of power to block things. That's what makes NIMBYism in this country so exceptionally bad. The second question is NIMBYism a word? It's a relatively new word. There's an IEA publication on housing from 1988 which describes the concept of NIMBYism, but which doesn't use that word yet. And that's because it wasn't yet a word, at least not in British English. When I started writing articles about housing, and that was about 12 years ago, I sometimes referred to NIMBYs or NIMBYism, and the editors wouldn't change it, they would keep it in, but they would usually spell out what it stands for. They would add in brackets, "not in my backyard." Nowadays, nobody does that anymore. Nowadays, editors just assume that everyone knows what a NIMBY is. And that's a bad thing, because it shows that NIMBYism is a big deal. If it wasn't, we would not need a word for it. But at least it also shows that the problem is now more widely recognized than it was before. The third question is NIMBYism a real word? Well, I'd say it's a real word in the same way in which pub is a real word. There was a time when you could have said pub is not a real word, it's just an abbreviation for public house. But today it would sound a bit strange if somebody said to you, "Let's go for a pint at the public house." And NIMBY, in the same way, it may initially have been an acronym for "not in my backyard," and it technically still is that. But I'd say if you can use it without consciously thinking about what it stands for, then yes, it's a real word. Question number 4. What is NIMBYism? Definition. Right, that's a bit difficult because NIMBYism is mostly a knee-jerk aversion to development, I would say. It's a mindset that if you don't like change in the area around you, you have a right to shut it down. Simply because you don't like it and you can. That's all the justification you need. Now, the problem with trying to define it precisely is that it's never used as a self-description. Nobody ever says, "I am a NIMBY." What a NIMBY would say typically is, "No, of course I'm not a NIMBY. I'm not against housing at all. I just want the right kind of housing in the right places." That's usually the giveaway phrase. So NIMBYs claim to support house building in the abstract, but they will then never support any actual house building project. They will talk about the right kind of housing, but the right kind of housing is always some other kind. They will talk about housing in the right places, but the right place is always somewhere else. It's as if someone said, "I love beer. I just hate ales and lagers and stouts and porters and milds and bitters and sours and wheat beers, or anything with hops, malt and barley, but I love beer in the abstract. So being a NIMBY is really a revealed attitude rather than a stated attitude. You don't become a NIMBY by identifying as one, because nobody does. You become a NIMBY by acting like one. And question number 5 is, what is NIMBYism meaning? Well, that's largely the same as the previous question, but I'll answer it slightly differently. I'll do that by talking about the difference between an actual NIMBY and someone who really has specific objections to a specific development project. The difference is simply that specific objections can usually be met. If your objection is that, let's say, the local infrastructure is already overstretched, that can be a perfectly reasonable concern. But that's an objection that can also be overcome. For example, in this case, by building additional infrastructure. If that solves the problem for you, then you're not a NIMBY. Then you really just have one specific objection against one specific type of development, which can be addressed. But if you're an actual NIMBY, you will then just jump to your next excuse. The next question is, why is NIMBYism a problem? Well, let's say there are 100 people who live in a particular area, right? And let's say somebody wants to build a few houses there. Let's assume that out of those 100 people, there are 50 who support that development project. There are 25 who don't care either way, and 25 who are opposed to it. So there is a clear pro-housing majority. And now let's imagine that this place starts a public consultation on the matter, planning meeting. Who is going to take part in that? Who will turn up and express their opinion? From experience, we know that only the 25 people who oppose will do that. Only the NIMBYs will turn up. NIMBYs have effectively a veto over development. That's simply because they are the sort of people who go to planning meetings or who write angry letters to a politician or a planner. They are the sort of people who will start signature campaigns and so on, whereas the pro-housing majority doesn't do that. They are usually passive. And that's why the current system is such a terrible way to make those kinds of decisions. It gives far too much power to self-selected groups of time-rich troublemakers. The next question is, what is NIMBYism geography? Well, I'm afraid I have no idea what this question means. And the last question is, what is NIMBYism again? Okay, I think I've answered that. NIMBYism, in a nutshell, is the reason why you can't afford a decent place to live and why you live in a stagnant economy. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button.